Devices are the various components inside your network that make up your infrastructure. Things like servers, switches, routers, databases, and storage. Your devices might be physical or virtual, and they might be in many physical locations, as well as in the cloud. From Logic Monitor's perspective, it doesn't matter whether they're on site, in the cloud, in a remote data center, or any combination. If it's part of your infrastructure, you should monitor it. Each portion of your internal network is behind a firewall and multiple layers of security, and we don't expect you to open up all of your devices to the internet to be monitored. Instead, you simply install a Logic Monitor collector on a server in each portion of your infrastructure. The collector is a Java application that will collect data from the other devices in the same portion of your infrastructure and return the collected data to Logic Monitor to be stored, processed, and evaluated against alert thresholds. All of that collected data is then made available to you, the user, through any computer with internet. You can view and keep track of all of your installed collectors from the settings page of your Logic Monitor account. And as long as each collector is up and running and able to communicate with Logic Monitor's servers, you can manage them from within your Logic Monitor account as well. Because your devices are monitored by collectors, the first step to deploying Logic Monitor is installing a collector in each location where you have devices to monitor. To install a collector, simply log into your Logic Monitor account from the server where you want to put the collector, and then download the collector installer from the settings page. Each collector has a unique ID that's included in the collector binary, so don't use the same file to install multiple collectors. The second step of deployment is adding the devices that you want each collector to monitor. Devices are added to Logic Monitor by their private IP addresses or DNS names. You can create folders in Logic Monitor to organize your devices based on location, device type, or essentially any other criteria. You can see a list of all the devices being monitored by a particular collector from the settings page. And you can see which collector is monitoring any given device from the devices page. Once you've installed a collector and assigned devices for it to monitor, there are certain things that it can begin monitoring right away simply by having the device's IP address. For example, it can monitor a response to ping, or it can check for an HTTP page on port 80. But each device also consists of many smaller individual components that we can collect information about. In Logic Monitor, each of these individual components is referred to as an instance. And of course, different types of devices have different types of instances. One of the things that makes Logic Monitor extremely simple to deploy is that you don't have to tell it the device types, and you don't even have to tell it what instances to monitor on your devices. Logic Monitor is designed to figure this out on its own through automated systems called Auto Properties and Active Discovery. The Auto Properties system will attempt to figure out what each new device is when you first add it into Logic Monitor. Then Active Discovery will attempt to find the instances on that device. Keep in mind that an instance doesn't have to be a physical or a hardware component. It might be a service or a process or an application. Think of an instance simply as one monitored component of any device. So if the device we're dealing with is a server, the instances would be things at the hardware level, such as disks, memory, CPU, and interfaces, as well as the services, processes, and applications that are running on it. If the device that we're dealing with is an ESX host, we'll still have the hardware instances, CPU, disks, and memory, but also things like the VMs that are running on the host, the VM backups, and the ESX data stores. You can view the monitored instances for each device from the Devices page by navigating to any device and then drilling down to the lowest level of the tree. In some cases, if there's not a way for Logic Monitor to automatically discover certain kinds of instances, then you can manually add instances of a device from the Manage option on the Devices page. One level above the instances on the device tree are data sources. Each data source defines a specific set of metrics that will be collected for certain types of instances. Data sources also define how frequently each metric will be collected, as well as what protocol to use to get the data. Your Logic Monitor account comes pre-built with a huge library of data sources, and you can clone them, modify them, or even add your own new ones. All of the data source definitions can be found and managed on the Settings page of your Logic Monitor account. The Applies To field of a data source definition determines which devices the data source will be associated with. The Active Discovery section defines how the instances will be discovered and monitored on those devices. If there is no active discovery, that means you'll add instances manually for that data source. Data sources are just one type of logic module. Overall, logic modules define how your collectors will interact with your devices. Specifically, they define what data will be collected. The data collection itself takes place inside your network, but the storage, analysis, and everything else happens in Logic Monitor's data centers. Let's go through the different types of logic modules. As we've covered, data sources define the numerical data that will be collected through periodic polling from a collector. Event sources define the specific events or logs from log files or event logs that should trigger alerts. Logic Monitor is not a log aggregation tool, so logs and events can only be sent to Logic Monitor for the purpose of triggering alerts. A collector will either parse the specified files every minute to check for new messages matching the criteria, or it can be configured to receive asynchronous messages. Property sources are essentially an extension of Logic Monitor's auto properties system. A property in Logic Monitor is a key value pair used to store some piece of information about a device, a group, or even an instance. Properties are used to store information like usernames and passwords, the physical location of a device, a serial number or license key, and so on. Config sources define configuration files that will be collected from devices. LM-config monitoring allows you to trigger an alert or even restore a config file to a previous version based on changes to that file. All of the Logic Module templates can be viewed and managed on the Settings page of your Logic Monitor account. The Applies To field in each Logic Module determines which devices that Logic Module will apply to. Remember that Logic Modules aren't stored locally on your collectors or even in your network at all. They're stored in Logic Monitor's data centers. You can think of the collector as a proxy that carries out tasks per the instructions laid out in the data sources, event sources, property sources, and config sources. Whenever you log into your Logic Monitor account and make a change to a Logic module, then your collectors will receive updated instructions from Logic Monitor's data centers. For that reason, there's no special connection between one particular collector and the devices it's monitoring. If you have two collectors installed in the same network and they're both able to access a particular device, then you can switch monitoring of that device between the two collectors, and it won't make a difference in the overall data collection. As collectors collect the data from devices, they send it back to Logic Monitor's data centers to be stored and processed. From there, Logic Monitor creates graphs, generates alerts, and presents all of the collected data back to you, the user, via the internet. We've now covered two major components of Logic Monitor's architecture: collectors, which do the monitoring, and devices, which consist of many monitored instances. Devices are in your internal network, and they're represented in Logic Monitor by their private IP addresses. Logic Monitor can also monitor the statuses and response times of publicly available IP addresses or websites. These are referred to in Logic Monitor as services. Publicly available IPs can be accessed directly from Logic Monitor's data centers, so you can monitor them without the use of a collector. If you want to monitor a website from a collector, you can do so using an internal services check. You can add and manage monitored websites from the Services page of your Logic Monitor account. Remember that a standard service check is initiated from outside your network, from one or more locations around the world, and an internal service check is initiated from inside your network, from one of your collectors.